Now, for more on the political and economic turmoil in Italy, I'm joined by Federiga Bindi from John Hopkins University. Federiga is a senior fellow at the Center for Transatlantic Relations at SAIS. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, as we know, Italy's government has essentially been stuck since these March polls resulted in a hung assembly. What sort of fallout does this political uncertainty have on the economy?
Well, as you told before, there was a widening of the spread, which touched over 300, and now calmed down a little bit to get to almost 250. Overall, the economy of Italy has regained a little bit since the crisis, and not so much. And this is very much part of the crisis that we are living today.
Now, before these elections, we know that Italy has had its fair share of unstable politics, but it also has some economic issues it's dealing with, including this high debt as well as high unemployment. How did things get to this point with Italy's economy?
Well, if you read articles from the 1970s, I was reading an article from the New York Times, it was even worse. So, you know, it really became changes on perspective. How did it get so worse, or how did it improve that much, but not as much as the other countries? That being said, generally speaking, first of all, there was a period in the past when people were allowed to retire, especially people in public sector, very early in their life. My mother retired basically the same year, at the same age where I entered the workforce, to give you an idea. And these people, which are a lot, have been waiting on public finances, because normally you pay the pension for what, 10, 20 years? And these people, you had to pay pensions for 40 or 50 or 60 years. So that had a wait. And the other thing is that when the turnover to the euro was done, there was a problem in the negotiations. And Italy basically had to overvalue the lira, which was one problem. And the other problem was that there was not enough checks in the change. So something that costed 10,000 liras before, it should have costed 5 euros. But the sound of 10,000 and 5 is very different. So lots of people profited and moved the price to 10 euros, which was out of law, but nobody checked. So basically, overnight, Italians had their buying powers divided by half, which is not the fault of Europe, it's the fault of the Italian system that didn't work properly.
So then, Federiga, how much of this election was about some of these economic issues versus it being a referendum on being pro or perhaps leaving the EU?
No, it was definitely not a referendum on leaving on the EU. I still think that Italy will not leave the euro, even less so the EU. You have to think that one of the major parties, which is Lega, has been successfully governing Veneto and Lombardy, which are very rich parts of Italy. So none of their constituency want to leave. More than that, I think it's a feeling of isolation, of being a periphery that Italy is experiencing, together with Greece. The feeling of being abandoned with this massive crisis arriving from Libya, which besides Italy have fixed by creating a treaty, signing a treaty with Libya, and then it was destroyed with the war which was led by France and Britain. So you have this massive flux of people coming in, and nobody's really helping, and this created a really lot of tensions, a lot of unhappiness in the country.
Now, as we saw, the global markets were really rattled by what they saw going on with Italy's political crisis. What sort of stakes does the global economy have in what's happening in Italy?
Well, first of all, the global market should have learned by now that Italy is not Germany. So there is a reason why Italy invented the opera and commedia. You know, Italians overreact. So not because a Di Maio or even a Savona goes and say we're going to leave the euro, this is going to happen. It's going to happen. Take Italians a little bit less seriously when they act dramatic. In the very unlikely case that Italy would withdraw, there would be chaos. I mean, we already see how many damages is going to take place with Brexit, which is not part of the euro, is not part of the inner core. So it would be a huge crisis. But again, I really don't see that coming.
Now, I've seen there's been some back and forth in terms of trying to pick an economy minister. What sort of impact is that having? And in terms of the best and worst case scenarios at this point for Italy, what do you see? Okay,
to be very frank, there were several options that the president had, because you had no real winners, no overall winners, but you had a coalition that won, and you had a party which had a relative majority. So had I been the president, I would have appointed the winning coalitions, which is a center-right one, within which, unexpectedly, Lega is the leader, not the Forza Italia Berlusconi. As an alternative, I would have asked the major party, which is Five-Star Movements, to try to form a government. The president decided to go neither way. He decided to take the Five-Star Movement on one side and the Lega from the other and put them together. Now, these parties could not be more different, but they only share this rhetoric against Europe, and so that was glued together, and that's why they came forward with the name of this Savona, which actually is, ironically, is one of the people who negotiated the Economic and Monetary Union and the Euro 20 years ago, but since then has become really anti-German, because the Germans are against an expansionistic policy.
Right. I'm sorry, unfortunately, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your insights. Federiga Bindi there of the SIAS at Johns Hopkins University.